Hey everybody, welcome to Classic Mini DIYs Operation Bad Wolf Part 2. I am probably going to stop counting these eventually because I think that I'm probably going to have a lot of episodes about this. But where we left off in the last episode was starting to disassemble the motor and get everything really taken apart so I can pull it and get all of the new stuff put on it. But there is still more that I need to pull off of the car, and it's actually nighttime right now. But I'm gonna try and get a few things done this evening. This video is gonna span probably a few days. So what I'm probably gonna try and focus on getting done today is probably pulling the exhaust off, dropping that, getting the manifold off, and then I might be able to get the shifter disassembled. So my remote shifter and that stuff, I'm not totally certain I'm gonna be able to show you guys this stuff because I don't have a lot of room underneath my car, but I'm going to try. I'm gonna give it a shot. And if I can, you guys are gonna see me removing the shifter. And if I can't, the next scene will be me holding the shifter, showing you guys what the remote shifter housing looks like, and just kind of the general idea of how that works on my car. I am not keeping the remote shift system. I've been back and forth on this for quite a little while now, really trying to decide whether or not I'm gonna keep that remote shifter. And ultimately, I have decided that I am not going to keep it. And before I go into why I'm removing it, I do want to touch on the fact that yes, I know the remote shifter is more solid than a rod change, just because that whole aluminum housing kind of creates an engine stabilizer. And yes, I know, it's what was on the motor when I got it. But the thing is, this remote shift housing is from an Austin, America. It's not an original Cooper S remote shift housing, and the reason that's important to call out, especially on my Mark I car, is that the shifter housing, specifically the place where the whole housing meets the actual differential and the gear selector system that goes up into the motor, that part uses something called a sandwich plate. And on the Cooper S remote shift housings, they're smaller. The whole thing is just smaller right around there. And from day one, and I'm talking like almost 10 years ago, day one, this shifter and this transmission never really fit in my car. And what that resulted in is that the motor always had to be slightly leaned back so that the shifter could angle itself down and not intercept my bulkhead. And it's not the end of the world. Obviously, I've driven my car like this for a while. And only recently did I really start having drive shaft issues, so I don't think that that is causing those. But some of the things that I've lived with for all these years are issues with fitment of an exhaust manifold, fitment of things like my HIF 44 that I got from 7 Mini or my dual HS2s. It's always been a huge headache. Just the engine can't come forward enough, and so like my radiator didn't fit. All in all, it's just a pain in the butt. So, since I was already going to be taking the transmission out and I'm going to be replacing the diff, I might as well just go ahead and replace the whole box and put a rod change in there. I'll thank myself. I can add some stabilization specifically on the thermostat housing. I can add another engine steady there, as well as the 2 engine steadies that can go on the bottom that mount directly to the subframe. This whole thing is going to make my quality of life much nicer with this car, and it gives you guys the opportunity to learn a little bit about rod change gearboxes, as well as maintenance on rod change gearboxes. So hooray! We both get to learn a little bit about it and do something that makes my life much nicer. So I think I've done enough talking. I'm gonna go out there, remove this stuff. Hopefully I can get it on camera. If not, I'll see you in a second. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna be doing is just removing the shifter and the whole shift linkage system on my remote gearbox. And it's pretty straightforward. For my car, I've got this little retaining ring that goes around the rubber gator here. I'm gonna take that off. I'm going to remove my shift knob, which actually I'll just go ahead and remove that first because that's easy. That's just as simple as unscrewing it. And you can see I've got my little chrome shift knob here. This thing's been through it. But the next thing we're gonna do is run these screws out. And then it's as simple as sliding this gator up and off. So we've got that off. And now all we gotta do is remove this whole retaining ring. And this is gonna be the last time I ever have to take this out, hopefully. And there we go. So this all kind of comes out together, but let's take a look at this real quick. So you have this little retaining ring, and then you've got the ring that sits on top, as well as your little spring that goes in here that kind of sits here and helps to manage when you're shifting. Now, one thing that these remote gearboxes have that the rod change gearboxes don't have is this little plastic bushing. And this bushing is kind of a known culprit for breaking and causing really sloppy gear shifts. So if you have a remote gearbox and you're having problems with it, it's not shifting when it should, things like that, check out this little plastic cup here. It might be that this just needs to be replaced, and it will help tighten up all of those gear shifts. So, something to look for. But aside from that, you can see down into your shifter, and at this point, we can actually go underneath the car, unbolt it, and remove this, which will make things a lot easier, which is something we're going to have to do in order to get the transmission out. So I'm going to head under there. I've already taken out the exhaust. I mentioned before it'd be kind of hard for me to show you, and I don't think I'm going to be able to show you guys this either, but I'll bring it out. I'll show you how it all works once it's all out of the car, and then we can move from there. See if we can get this motor pulled. Now off camera, I did a few things, which I'm going to go over here in a little bit of detail, just so you guys know what you need to do when you're taking your engine out of the car. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's actually surprisingly simple how few things you have to do in order to get this motor out. But let's go over them real quick. I'm going to pull out my phone, and then I will show you guys a little bit closer over here on this side. So as we're looking at it from the top here, a few things that you're going to have to remove. The clutch slave cylinder, which mounts right here, or a little bit lower down here if you have a Verto clutch. In my case, I've got a pre-Verto clutch, so it mounts right up here. You have to take your upper engine steady off, which mounts to the body of the car here, and then mounts into a bolt on the side of your block. Next, if you have an engine steady over your thermostat housing, it might stretch across the back here and mount here. In my case, I don't have one of those, so it's not necessary. The next thing is obviously the transmission, which I'll show you guys my remote transmission here shortly, so you see what that looks like in comparison to a rod change transmission. And then the last thing that you're going to need to take out are the lower engine steady bolts. So those two holes that are right there mount to an engine steady that goes right underneath your walk on the clutch side, and then you have another one on your radiator side with another two bolts. After that, all you have to do is simply take off the additional stuff on the front here, which I've already showed you guys in my last episode. Past that, a few other little things you'll want to check. Make sure that your oil pressure line, if you have a copper one running back, is disconnected here. Otherwise that'll tear and that'll break. In my case, I've got a braided one, and that's also been disconnected. It's sitting off to the side there. And the key here is just to make sure that there is enough room and everything is off so you can pull the motor out safely and cleanly. Now, obviously, you're going to need an engine lift for something like this. A lot of people ask me, why don't you try removing the engine using the system where you actually let the subframe down in the front and you lift the body off of the car? And my answer to that is, it is equally as difficult and has the same level of requirement with this engine lift that you would need if you were pulling the motor out the top. The reason that is because you actually have to lift the body high enough to get it clear of your motor. Not to mention the bolts that are on the subframe and everything else up here. I think that it is considerably easier to pull it out the top. Just take your time, lift it out, and make sure that you don't knock anything off and you don't bump anything, and you're in pretty good shape. The places I've seen it liking to hit is right here on this front bumper, the valence on the front, and then the bulkhead on the back. Now you might see me, after I start to lift this up and out of the car, you might see I add some ratchet straps to kind of angle the engine backwards. That is my ghetto fabulous way of making sure the engine clears everything. That's also one of the reasons I want to change from the remote gearbox to a rod change gearbox, is because it allows me more room back there. So we'll get into that in a little bit. As you can see, I've got these custom spark plug mount engine lifts. This is the way I've done it on all of my engine pulls. However, there are other ways. Some people will mount them to the engine studs. Other people will mount them to the top here where your rocker assembly mounts. What I would recommend is doing it the way that the Haynes manual and the way that they did it from the factory, which was these engine studs. This is just the method I use, and it may be the right way. It's the right way for me, but it might not be the right way for you. So the last thing I'll say is, if you're doing this at home, be extra careful. This thing's heavy and it can cause a lot of damage. Make sure you take all the safety precautions you can and try and avoid dropping this and hurting yourself. If you have any hesitation about it, bring the car to a licensed mechanic and let them do this. There's no shame in letting someone who is more comfortable doing something like this do it for you. But anyway, let's dive into this and let's pull this motor. If you want some, just let me know. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. One motor from an engine bay to the ground. And wasn't too bad. Wasn't too bad. I only destroyed my speedometer cable because I forgot to disconnect that. Whoops. And so I'll be replacing that. Put it on the list of things that are going to get replaced on this thing. Now the next step, of course, is to get this onto the engine stand. But before I can do that, I've got to take apart the transfer case and the gearbox. It's just too much weight for that engine stand, and it would make me feel a lot better if this was off already and off to the side, since it's all coming off and getting replaced anyways. I'll put the camera over here. I can zip all that off. I'll show you guys real quick how to take off your clutch, and then we'll dismount this from the block and put it on that stand. All right, so now we've got this motor on the ground, and as you can see, I took it out with the radiator, and I found that taking the whole motor out with the radiator has been considerably easier to do than taking the radiator off, getting all down there and everything and trying to make it all come out. But what that means in my case is that I left all of the coolant inside the radiator, and I've got that waterless coolant in here. Now normally I would try and reclaim that waterless coolant and reuse it. Because I have a whole nother gallon of it, and this didn't take an entire gallon, I've got a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm just gonna empty this out, I'm gonna drain it into my drain pan, and then I'm gonna remove my radiator and all this extra hosing, the clamps, and the water pump. I'm gonna make this a little bit lighter, the whole block and everything a little bit lighter, so that I can put this on the engine stand. I realized that I don't have a flywheel puller right now, so I'm just gonna try and get as much off of it as I can, and then once I get that flywheel puller, I'll be able to take the whole transmission off. Now you might be wondering, Cole, why are you using vice grips? There's a nice little Allen key on there for you to use. And yes, I know there is, I know, but I don't have an Allen key that fits this, and this stopper is already pretty banged up, messed up. I'm gonna have to replace it here anyway. So I'm just gonna use my vice grips and empty out this coolant. All right, so I want to show you guys something that I just discovered and might explain why my drive shaft kept failing on this side of the car. It's pretty crazy, actually, now that I'm looking at it, but let's get a little close up. Now that is your engine mount. Check that out. It is almost completely failed. Well, there. Now it's completely failed. That is definitely not what it should be doing. That is just crazy. So I'm wondering if under torque, when the motor would accelerate, this would be bending, allowing this drive shaft to intercept something that it shouldn't. Specifically, maybe the subframe or something like that. Let's go over to the subframe and take a look. So if we look down here, check that out. That's some serious scoring from a drive shaft, that's for sure. Now, I don't know if that happened when it failed, or if maybe when the engine would torque and that engine steady would be fatigued and broken, it would allow it to press down. Let's rotate Well, I can't rotate that because the car's not jacked up right now. But if we compare it, that side, no wear. This side, serious wear. I'm still going to go to rod change, and I'm still going to change the drive shaft system, but that's crazy. That makes me feel a lot better, and I feel like I have just discovered why my drive shaft kept failing. But anyways, let's keep taking stuff off and getting this all disassembled. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that is a good place to put a pin in it for today. I have got to go see Avengers Infinity War tonight. I'm very excited about that. And I think that this was a pretty damn constructive day. We got the engine out. We've got some of it disassembled, radiator off, coolant out. All the ancillary items are off of the motor now. Really, I just need to start taking apart this transfer case. I gotta pull the flywheel that's over here, and then I'm gonna start disassembling things. I'm gonna take the head off, I'm gonna take the gearbox off, and I am going to take this timing cover off. There is a lot to do, but we're gonna get through it. We're gonna have some fun doing it, and we're gonna learn a lot of stuff about motors while this is apart. So until the next episode, it's either gonna be the 998 rebuild or Operation Bad Wolf. At this point in time, I do not have enough time, nor do I have a car to do regular DIY videos. So everything is gonna be about this build or the 998 build that I'm already doing. So stay tuned for that and come with me on this super exciting rebuild journey. Anyways, I'll see you guys on the next episode. Until then, enjoy those minis and motor on.